Hey guys, this is Daniel Martinez, your instructor for Civil 3D for the spring 2019 semester. This is a recording for class on January 29th, Tuesday. Kind of picking up where we left off last week with regard to grading objects. The purpose for this recording is to get you guys a pre-recorded lesson that you guys can reference to pursue future projects. Right. So what we talked about last week with regard to grading in these pads in preparation for the access road project that we have coming up is all correct. But this is going to be a reference to give you guys some sort of baseline that you can use to start regrading these things out again. So this is going to be an instructional that's going to pretty much go through the whole process all over again for you, for the individuals who missed the class, and also just for your own reference guide, maybe even after you get out of the class, graduate college, and become engineers for yourselves. If you need a refresher, hopefully this can get you there. So as a disclaimer as well, I obviously cannot see you guys, so I am going to try to slow myself down, but if I do happen to speed up, the cool thing about a video is that you can pause, rewind, and even make my voice in super slow motion if you need to. But I will try to keep a good pace and slow down and give you guys time. As I am typing different commands in, I will try to find where the commands are on the toolbar for you up here. If I cannot find them, I will type them in, and you'll be able to follow my commands along down here in the command line window. So if I want to, for example, rotate this pad, I'm going to type in the rotate button down here, hit enter, and you can follow along what I'm doing in the bottom left of your screen, and so forth. So to start back from the very beginning, to give you guys kind of a run through of an SOP for this project, I'm going to show you how to even get to these files. So if you may have, I think a couple people missed class, in order to find these files, I posted these files up on Blackboard. Alright, sorry about that, guys. So in order to find these files, if you go into Blackboard, you browse to the course content folder, and you go to the files for use area, there'll be a project, warehouse access road project, available. Go ahead and select that file, and it should start to download. When you download it, do a save as, and save it to your thumb drive that you're taking or keeping for class. Then when you get to it, you'll have it'll be a zipped file. So and a zip file, you can tell because it has a little zipper right here next to the file in the file icon. So to open up that zip file, Civil 3D or any program won't allow you to directly access these files without unzipping them. So what you have to do is right click those and hit extract all. And it should default to the same area where you were doing this. So if you were to hit extract here, it'll open up a new window that now has your extracted files. You're basically going to have a copy at this point. You're going to have warehouse access road project without the zipper, and then one with the zipper. So you can go ahead and delete the one without the zipper once you have it going. So once you get into that project, open up the folder, and you can double click this to launch a new session at Civil 3D. Or you can go from your Civil 3D window, do a file, open, and you can access that project directly from here as well. Notice there's two files. We'll talk about this other file here in a moment, and there's a couple other folders as well. Please do not alter any of these folders. Give me one moment. Please do not alter any of these folders. and only open up the warehouse access road project. So if you haven't gotten to this step yet, you don't need to worry about it, because what we're going to do is go from scratch and create a new pad. Do all this grading from new. To give you a little bit of background, if you're new to this project, this is actually the northeast end of a runway wing for the Morgantown Airport. I downloaded this data from the DEP's available LiDAR resources for the state. This data is kind of low quality compared to what the state has nowadays. It's 2011 availability is when it was flown. But if I pick this up in Object Viewer and rotate it, you can kind of see what's going on here. Looks like we have a couple stockpiles here, soil stockpiles. Looks like there's a stream that runs up along this way, probably another stream that runs along this way. A couple access roads that maybe go throughout, but you see you have this big flat area up here. So that big flat area is the graded portion, is this area, the graded portion of the runway. So I also went through the process of georeferencing aerial imagery for you guys. So to access that aerial imagery, you need to open up an XREF, an external reference. So I'm going to kind of go through this fairly quickly because we talked about this already in class. But to access an external reference, type in XREF, follow along on my command line, hit enter. This window will open up and you'll see that there's an airport imagery file that's unloaded as a status. All you need to do is right click that file and hit reload. And it'll bring up the aerial imagery for the Morgantown Airport. You can kind of see what's going on. The intent is we are going to grade a road in from the existing county route that's here, across the floodplain or across the valley bottom here, up this area, and ultimately to come up to this pad. Our objective is we're going to try to get a road into this existing concrete pad, hopefully try to tie into what's already there as far as roads go. But one of the, kind of speaking as the figurative client or the engineer, right? So the situation is that we're the engineer on a project, and the client has asked us to build a big pad in that they can use to accommodate maybe a turnaround or another building site. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to extend this flat area that's already here. If you know how to read contours, contours that are far apart are very flat, little elevation change. Contours that are very close together, like here, indicates a steep hillside. What we're trying to do is extend the flat area of the of this like runway ramp extension type area. We're trying to extend that flat area in order to accommodate a new building site. So aside from working from the access road and all that, what we're going to start with is working on the grading for the site. So these two grading features are features that we had already done in class. You can kind of see what's going on. This is a flat pad with some sloping daylighting on it in fill. This is a little pit that we made in order to be able to get material, get soil and material in order to build up this hillside. And how these guys interact together. So you can kind of see is that the existing ground is doing its thing over here, and now we have this flat pad that grades out to existing ground and kind of recreates the terrain a little bit the way that we want it to. So what I'm going to do now is go through the process of making this, redoing this grading for you guys. So first things first, in order for Civil 3D to create a grading object, it needs to have something to start from. And that thing that you start from is referred to as a feature line. So if I click on this object, we'll see that we get the new contextual ribbon up here that shows up. If you remember, when we click on objects, we get a contextual ribbon that shows up. So it reads this as a feature line here, and it also gives us this feature line ribbon. If I were to access my properties, we would also see that it's called out as a feature line right over here. So what we need to do is create a feature line, but in order to create a feature line, we got to start from somewhere. So what I'm going to do is literally draw a rectangle. And if you remember from your old CAD class how to do that, type in rectangle. And then you're gonna specify a corner. So I'm gonna click somewhere and drop in the first corner, and you'll see it's starting to draw it. I'm gonna draw it by dimensions though. A few options that it has for us here is to draw it by dimension. We can do it by square area and rotation angle as well, but for now we're just gonna click dimension. We're gonna make this a 100 by 200 pad. So specify length, we'll go 200. Specify width, we'll go 100. And then we'll left click again to drop it in place. So this is going to be the kind of baseline for our feature line here. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of rotate one of these edges like we did just in our other area. We're going to rotate one of these edges so that it kind of more lines up with this existing contour here, and so that it matches the terrain a little bit more. So in order to rotate this rectangle, I'm going to select it, and then I'm going to type in rotate. I'm going to hit enter. And you'll see that I have snaps, these little green buttons that are showing up on my screen here. Wherever I move my cursor, those are object snaps. You can toggle those on and off with F3. So I'm hitting F3, and it's toggling on and off whether I can actually use that. At this moment, I'm going to turn it off just to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to select where I want my pivot point to be, and then I'm going to rotate this polyline to kind of parallel that contour right there. I think I can squeak that contour up a little bit higher. I'm trying to think how if you'll notice, there's already a little bit of a natural roadway that is approaching here. I'm going to turn off this imagery just to make it easier. To turn it off, you just open up your XREF manager with XREF, and then right click your drawing, not any of these images, but your drawing, and hit unload. And if you know how to read contours, you'll know that these smooth contours along here mean a constant hillside. These contours have a break on them, indicate a road coming up through this way. So I'm going to try, I know, kind of planning ahead, our access road is going to come through there. And it looks like it continues to come even up through here. So I think it makes sense to try to maybe squeak our rectangle up a little bit higher. So to do that, I'm going to select it. I'm going to type in move. I'm going to click somewhere and just move it kind of roughly where I want it. It looks like our access road contours come through here. So to kind of naturally make it continue onto it, I'm going to drop that down right here so the access road kind of continues on. Now that we have the location of this feature line, of this, I'm sorry, it's not a feature line of this rectangle, meaning we pretty much have the outline of what the pad is going to be set, I am going to turn that into a feature line at this point. And we'll run into a couple different dialogues when we do this. So to turn it into a feature line, you got to go to your home tab up here, and you got to go to feature line. We do have the ability to create a feature line from scratch, but right now I think it'd just be easier to create feature lines from objects since we already have this rectangle to start from. So I'm going to create feature line from object, then I'm going to select that feature line. I'm going to select that rectangle, sorry, and hit enter. And when you do that, it gives us a couple options for creating our feature lines. Couple of things to note. Sites in Civil 3D. Let's talk about sites for a second. So if we were to go to our Prospector tab in our tool space, and remember this is where all the information is stored, all the intelligent objects are stored in CAD, kind of like an organization catalog. If we go to, sites here, we'll see that there's a few sites. The sites that defaulted with this drawing were grading main and grading other. When you first open this drawing, if you haven't worked in class on this project yet, you won't have a site pad. What we did in class is we created site pad in order to store all our grading. So what sites do is it allows us to group multiple grading objects, multiple surfaces, multiple grading objects, multiple intelligent features of a certain type into one area so that they don't conflict with each other. So that so that we can keep our drawing organized and so we can keep entities separated. So right now, if I click on this surface, you'll see that it selects both of these surfaces. And that's because both these surfaces were created on the same site, and that site is site pad over here. For this area, I want this to be its own standalone surface and its own standalone grading set. So I'm going to create a new site. Right-click Sites, and hit new. I'm going to change the site name to site, let's go with secondary pad. And hit OK. All right, so that site now shows up in our tool space. If it doesn't show up, right-click sites at the top and hit refresh. So now when we go to create feature line, and we're back in this dialog box, we'll see that it now includes that site secondary pad site in our drop-down list. We want this feature line to be included in that site, so let's select that. A couple more options. These are okay by default. All these are okay by default. These down here do a couple different things. If I were to have selected erase existing entity, like I'll just do, that means that this feature line, or that polyline, is transformed into a feature line, as you can see. And the old polyline is no longer there. So what it did is it took that feature line, it took that polyline, turned it into a feature line, and didn't keep it original. Didn't keep the original polyline. If we uncheck that, we would have both a feature line and a polyline in that spot, which we don't really want to do. There's circumstances you do want to do that, but we're going to avoid that this time around. We're also going to uncheck assign elevations, and this is very important. If you do select assign elevations, what it's going to do is it's going to ask you how you want to assign elevations, and a way that you can do that is it'll probably default to existing ground. So it's going to ask you a surface to derive elevations from. And what it's going to do is it's going to sample this existing terrain at each corner or each vertex of the feature line, and it's going to snap that feature line down to the surface elevation. So what you're going to end up with is no longer a flat pad, it's going to be a crooked pad. It's going to have angles dipping everywhere, and we don't want that. What we want to do is, just like this other area, we want to create a flat pad for stability. So we're going to uncheck assign elevations, and we're going to hit OK. So now this turns this into a feature line. What we do want to do is, right now this feature line, if we click on it and open up our elevation editor, ooh, that's huge. If we open up our elevation editor, we can see as we cycle through these elevations, this little green diamond changes. It's telling us which elevation or which vertex it has selected. All these are set at 0 elevation. This surface is not at sea level. The surface is not perfectly flat. So what we need to do is identify what elevation we want this pad to be set at in order to interact well with the surface. So in other words, I'm going to put both these objects in Object Viewer. When I rotate this on its side, that feature line is down at 0 elevation, way below our pad. And we don't want that feature line down there. That feature line represents the top of our pad where the trucks are going to climb onto. So what we're going to do is we're going to give that feature line elevations at a certain constant elevation. And how we're going to do that is we're going to assign spot elevations to both of these corners. We're going to figure out what the elevation of the ground is at both of these corners. We're going to snap our feature line down to that. So to do that, kind of drawing from our first or our second class together, I think, select your surface, go to Add Labels, hit Spot Elevations. Then it'll ask you to select a point. Just put a couple spots here on the corners. For me, my spot elevations are 1243.75 and 1242.79. That's a little bit crooked, isn't it? So what this is telling me is that this is high up. This corner is pretty much a whole foot higher than this corner on the surface. So I think I'm just going to call this an even 1244. Yeah, I'm going to call this an even 1244. You will call it whatever it happens to work out for you once you figure this out. So on this elevation editor here, you will select one elevation, hold down Shift and select the top elevation. So what we've done is just selected all 4 corners. Double click one of these elevations and type in 1244 and hit enter. What that does is it raises all the corners to be at a certain elevation. So now what happens, you can see my rectangle here. That rectangle is at the right elevation that we need in order for it to be at the correct elevation for our surface. So I like that. So we've got a good pad elevation set. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually grade down to existing ground from here, just like we did over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create this red surface, red and yellow surface, and we're going to create these grading lines. By the way, if you guys aren't getting this little dialog box that I'm getting that allows me to pick through certain entities, you can hold down Control plus W and it'll turn that off. So now you only select whatever the topmost layer is. You can hit Control plus W again to turn that back on, and it'll give you that option again. I kind of like it, so I'm going to keep it. So I don't need this dialog box anymore, so I'm going to close that. Now what we need to do is we need to start grading it, or we need to tell it to do a fill or cut slope to existing ground at a certain % gradient. So the way we accomplish that is kind of similar to the way we made the feature line. And you'll notice that a lot of things in CAD are approached, in Civil 3D at least, are approached the same way. So what we do is, like we created a feature line up here, we go to grading, down, hit create, grading creation tools. Oops. We get this little window pop up when we do that. So on these windows, typically, you work from left to right on the windows. So the leftmost button sets our grading group. And our grading group is kind of related to our site. You remember we created a separate site for this area? So if I'm going to set my grading group and I hit that button, you'll see that the site we're selected under is site pad, and that's a remnant from the old, from our last class. What we just did is created a new site and called it secondary pad. So I'm going to select that. You'll notice that there's no group name under here, and that's because there has been no grading group selected or created for this site. So what you're going to do is hit this button on the right and hit create a grading group, and it's going to ask you for the group name. As a hint, the group name is going to turn into your surface name. So I'm going to call this site, I'm going to call this grading group secondary pad. You do want to make sure that you select automatic surface creation. You want to check mark that. And then this is fine. You don't need to worry about this. Hit OK. And it'll take you to the create surface dialog box, which everything should be set by default, so hit OK. And then lastly, hit OK again. You'll notice that the site secondary pad is set, group name is secondary pad, hit OK. You'll notice now that that secondary pad is selected here on our grading group. So again, working from left to right, we're going to hit this button. This is our set the target surface. And what this button does is saying, from this feature line, we are going to grade down to a certain object, to a certain surface. And that surface is existing ground in this case, which is called existing ground dash warehouse. So that surface that we want to set the target to, for me, it came up by default as that. If you don't like it, you can go ahead and select one of these other ones. Do not alter this surface or don't select it. Just stay with existing ground warehouse. So once you do that, hit OK. Then we're given a couple options here. That's really the last thing we need to do on that standpoint. What we don't need to worry about either of these buttons. What we do need to worry about is this drop down. This drop down gives us a bunch of different options to figure out how we want to get from this feature line down to this surface. So the most common one that we're going to be using is to surface by slope. What that does is it's going to grade to the existing ground surface, kind of true to that first statement, and it's going to grade it by a certain slope. The slope is in reference to a rise over run number. So if we want a 2-to-1 slope, that means for every 2 feet horizontal we go, we're going to go 1 foot down or up, depending on whether we're in a cut or fill condition. There's a couple other options like relative elevation by grade. I might go through those a little bit later. But for now, we want to do to surface by slope. Once we have that selected from our drop down here, you can skip. You can skip this button, go straight to this button. This button is called Create Grading. So select that. You'll notice it gives us a pick box. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select my feature line. Now it's going to give us a couple options. So select the grading side. This is telling me whether I want to grade away from this feature line or towards the inside of this feature line. So which side of the feature line do I want to grade on? I want to grade away. I want to grade out, just like we did here. So I'm going to select out, somewhere outside of the feature line, just like I just did. It's going to ask us to apply to the entire length. Essentially, we want it to go all the way around, so that is true. We're going to hit yes. It's asking for a cut slope now, and then it's going to ask for a fill slope. And that cut slope and fill slope, again, is just in relation to rise over run, which in this case, we're just going to make it a 2-to-1 cut slope. So just hit 2, enter. And then it's going to ask for a fill slope, do the same thing, 2, enter. Give it a second, now it'll grade. So what it's done now is it's gone down to that existing ground elevation. And when you're done with that, hit enter. No, shoot. When you're done, after you create the grading, hit escape. And it'll save that. So what it's done now is it's created a grading object. So what it's done is it's held, if you'll notice it's held, the flat portion of this pad here, if we look at it on its side. It's held the flat portion of the pad, which is a feature line. And it's graded away from the feature line like we told it to, at a certain slope of 2-to-1. If you notice, when I pick this up in Object Viewer, so I'm going to select that surface, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to hit Object Viewer. If you'll notice, when I rotate this over, there's a big hole in the middle. So what's happened is that CAD is intelligent enough to know how to grade out. Once you tell it certain parameters, it knows how to grade out far enough to intersect the existing ground. It's not intelligent enough, though, to read our minds and know that we also wanted this middle area filled in. So what we got to do is tell it to fill in. And the way that's done is creating an infill. Creating an infill is super easy. If you go back to our menu here, you go to the right side, and instead of hitting Create Grading, you pull this drop down, you hit Create Infill. Select that, and then once you cross inside of the area that you want to infill, it'll highlight it. It'll highlight the extents, as you can see. Just hit it once and hit enter, and that infill is created. You should see this green diamond show up, which is very important. Anytime there's a green diamond, it means that there's grading going on there. If your diamonds get really big, oops, I guess that wasn't a good example, but if your diamonds get really big, or even if you're out this far and it gets so big that it takes up all your screen, just like this, it's a really simple problem. All you need to do is zoom in a little bit and type in RE, enter. It's a regen command. It'll just kind of reset your graphics, and it'll put them back small. So what we've done now is if I select that surface and I right click and go to Object Viewer, now it has, now the hole is filled in. And to kind of show you what we just did, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to draw a profile through this. I'm going to draw a cross section, through this pad to see it compared to the existing ground in a 2D perspective from the side. In class, I covered quick profiles. I think I'm going to go ahead and cover more permanent profiles today. I'll go over both. I'll do both. So right now we'll talk about quick profiles. A quick profile is a temporary profile of an area that we can draw. It's temporary because as soon as you hit the save button to save your drawing, which I would recommend doing often as you're doing this, it goes away. So to draw a quick profile, I'll go through this kind of quickly. Draw a polyline, which is just P-line command. Hit enter. Draw a line going across where you want your profile to go. Select that line, right click, and hit quick profile down here. So right now it's asking what do you want to sample with that profile. So it's basically just asking what surfaces do you want to see. Right now I pretty much just don't want to see intermediate EG. And I'm going to change the style of both of these so that they show up different from the existing ground. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a second. I'm also going to change my profile style to profile grid 1x at 20 scale. I'm going to hit OK. And then I'm going to drop that profile somewhere. All right, so to show you what we've just done, this yellow line up here is our grading. The blue dashed line is the existing ground. So this profile will shift depending on where I drop that polyline. And we don't need this window anymore. We can close out of this. This profile will shift depending on where I put that polyline. So it'll shift pretty dramatically if I pull the polyline all the way out that way. So you can see what it's doing as it's going across here. So now you'll notice as I move across my profile on the left side of your screen, there's a blue line that advances along the profile line, along this polyline on the right side of our screen, just to kind of indicate where we are on that profile. You'll notice right here where the contours get flat, there's a spot, which I imagine is a bench or something like that, maybe a road, a real wide road where something's allowed to pass. So to make this a little bit more dramatic for you, you don't have to do this, but to make this a little bit more dramatic and to be able to talk about slope and rise over run, I'm going to edit my grading in order to raise it up a little bit so we see a little bit more of a dramatic grading extent. This is really low impact right now. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to click on my feature line, and I'm going to go to my elevation editor, and I'm going to raise this incrementally. I'm going to raise this, what's crazy? I'm going to raise this 7 feet in elevation. So to equally add 7 feet to each of these elevations, I'm going to hit this button. It's incremental elevation option. This is the increment that I want to change the elevations. So I'm going to change that to 7 and hit enter. And then this up or down arrow is asking us whether we literally want to raise our feature line up 7 feet or down 20 feet. In this case, I want to raise it up 20 feet. And what you'll see is it just created a little bit more of a grading extent, but it also just automatically updated my quick profile. So we had talked about earlier about setting these grades at a 2-to-1 slope. So to show you what I mean, if I draw a polyline that is 2 feet over and 1 foot up, that polyline is going to match this contour, this slope perfectly, because that slope was made to be a 2-to-1 slope, as you can see. I can come back through after the fact, and maybe I found out my soil conditions are really bad, and I need to go shallower of a slope. So I can select my grading here. I can hit edit grading, and I can change my slope to a 4-to-1. And you'll see it automatically update here to a 4-to-1 to flatten out my slopes. Generally, it's a good idea to try to flatten out your slopes from a civil engineering standpoint, just because there's a less of a chance for slips and less of a chance of soil instability the flatter your slopes are. And you got to think about it from the standpoint of the angle of repose of an object. I think a 2-to-1 slope is equivalent to 50% grade, which is roughly equivalent to, I think, 30-some degrees, like 35 degrees or something like that. I think a typical angle of repose for a soil type is about 30 degrees. So if you have a slope that's shallower than the angle of repose of your soil, it's likely going to be stable. But that's not a guarantee. It's just kind of a best practice. So what we've done is we've graded a pad here that is going to be conducive to a truck ramp running up it. I'm going to bring these elevations back down because I don't like how big an impact my site has. It's unnecessarily high, right? So I don't need my truck coming along this way to have to climb 7 feet additional just to climb my pad here. So what I'm going to do is drop these elevations back down by selecting the feature line and just hitting this drop down arrow. All right. This profile, I added the other surface to it, so we can go here and we can see how crazy our grading is over there. Right? I can add a vertex to this profile, and I can see how it's being sampled along this area. So if I change my grading extents here, I hope this doesn't crash my computer. Yeah, it looks funny, but that is correct. So I'm going to change that back. So guys, if you have issues with your pad, let's say, for example, your pad is doing something like this, where you have it sloping to one side really oddly. Or if you got some really funky stuff like this going on, where if I pick this up in 3D, we'll see that it's actually in a cut and fill situation. There's a lot of weird stuff going on. Or if you even do something crazy and just about blow up your computer like I'm about to. You do something crazy like this and it's really not happy. You probably have an elevation issue with your surface. So if you remember, we set these spot elevations in order to set our feature line at an elevation of 1244 is what we determined. So if I click back on my feature line and I hit elevation editor, we can go through here and see what all the actual elevations of the surface are set to. So we'll see that they're all kind of all over the place. And that's why we have all these weird inconsistencies in our surface. So what I'm going to do is simply select all of those by selecting one of them and hitting Control A. After I do that, I'll select an elevation and I'll reset it to 1244. And it'll be all flat again and the world is at peace, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Notice I saved it and now my quick profile disappeared. My polyline is still there, but the quick profile disappeared. So that's why they're quick profiles. They're just temporary. They don't really have any weight to them. So I'm going to talk about a couple different types of grading now. Excuse me. I'm enjoying my coffee while doing this video. I'm going to talk about a couple different types of grading now. I'm going to save it. And we can grade this out a little bit differently. So I'm going to draw a quick profile again. Well, I'm going to do this the other way, actually, the more permanent way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw an alignment, and then I'm going to draw a profile from that alignment. So, sounds a little bit complicated, but I'm just going to go to Alignment dropdown, Alignment Creation Tools, and I'm going to do this kind of quick because it's not really necessary. I'm going to rename it to Profile. I'm going to keep all these at default and just hit OK. It'll give me another drop down here. And I'm just going to, again, even with alignments, you work from left to right. So I'm going to select my left button, and it's going to draw a tangent no curves alignment, meaning that it's just going to put two straight lines together. So I'm going to strike that across where I want it to. Then after I get that set, I'm going to go to Profile here. I'm going to create a surface profile. It's going to select the only alignment I have in my drawing, and it's going to ask me to add the surfaces I want to that profile. So I want to add existing ground, the pad, and the secondary pad. And I'm going to change my last two, my proposed styles here, to a proposed style, which is P-surface grade. So your window should look like mine. Don't hit OK, hit Draw in Profile View. And then change the style to 1x by 20, and then hit Create Profile View. And then just drop it in on the left, and there it is. Same exact thing like we saw, except now you can save it, and it won't go away. So now we're going to talk about different ways to grade. This will be the last topic we cover. So this is basically a review from the last class. Some of you may have already seen this, but what I want you guys to do is to grade us a little mountable berm is what it's called. So we're going to say, I'm trying to think of ways to put this that's realistic too, like an airport or something like that. We're going to say this is a fueling pad, right? So they're going to put some gas tanks up here, a little fueling station for trucks to come by. Fueling stations typically need to have what's called secondary containment, which just refers to if a fuel tank was to have a leak or a spill up here and it were to rupture, the fuel and the liquids wouldn't just spill over the edge and run on down the hill to the nearest receiving stream. It will have a berm, a form of secondary containment aside from the tank that will be used to trap the liquids from spilling out. And the easiest way to do that is by creating a berm around your pads. But the berms have certain criteria on them that allow them to be mountable, meaning that trucks can drive up and over them without bottoming out. So what we're going to do is create a little mountable berm there. So in order to do that, I'm going to delete my grading for the fill slope here. I'm going to go ahead and keep my infill, but I'm going to delete my fill slope grading. And the way that you do that is by selecting the lines, the yellow lines that are running perpendicular to your contours, and up here hitting delete grading. Do not hit the delete key to delete those lines. Hit delete grading when it shows up. So now I need to get my grading creation toolbar back. So I'm just going to go to grading and grading creation tools. You'll see that all the defaults were set by last time, except this time I'm going to change my grading style. I don't want to change to surface by slope since I want to create a berm. I'm going to do something like an offset slope, let's say. So offset slope, you'll see what it allows me to do. But it allows me to grade differently. So I'll do the same thing. I just selected my feature line. I want to grade to the outside. That's good. I do want to apply it to the entire length, so I'll hit yes. Now it's asking me a distance. So what I want to do is I want to create a 20-foot wide berm. No. I want to create a 25-foot wide berm. I want it to have side slopes that are 10 feet long, and I want those side slopes to be a 2-to-1 slope. So essentially I want the berm to be 5 feet high, if you work the math out on that. And then I want to have a 5-foot top width, right? So what I want is something like this. So I'm going to have my flat pad here, and I'm just drawing this out for the sake of discussion. I'm going to have a 10-foot wide side slope on the outside at a 2-to-1 grade. So I want it to be 10 foot wide, and a 2-to-1 is going to make it 5 feet high. So I'm going to have a side slope that does that. Then I want a 5-foot flat top portion, so it's going to look like that on top. And then I want to grade down at a 4-to-1 again and see how that works. I want to keep 4-to-1. So what that means is that I'm going to go out. It's going to look something kind of like this. Oops. And this ramp here is going to continue until it hits existing ground. So our side slope is going to look very similar to this. And we'll prove it here. So I'm going to do my offset slope again. I'm going to select the outside. I'm going to apply to entire length. I'm going to do a 10-foot distance that I'm going to offset. And I'm going to make it at a slope of a 2-to-1. If I wanted to go down, I would have made it -2. All right. And then from here, I'm going to change. I want to make a flat berm on top. And there's really no way to say flat when you're talking in respects to rise over run, because it's going to kind of infinitely approach zero gradient. So instead in CAD, what we do is we go offset grade, and that'll allow us to do percent grades. So if I hit this create grading button again, I'm going to select this outside most portion of feature lines. I'm going to apply to entire length. I'm going to specify the distance, which is 5 feet. Then I'm going to specify the grade, which flat is just a 0% grade. There's no rise or fall there. And kind of see how this takes shape in my cross section here. And then from here, it's a simple fact of going to what we were doing before and grading to surface by slope. This is exactly how we started the video. Hitting create grading, hitting our last one here, We do want to apply it to entire length. We want our fill slopes and cut slopes to be 4:1. Really hoping this doesn't shoot out over the side. And that looks pretty good. If you notice, a little diagram I drew fits perfectly right. So our idea of what we wanted is good. We have a little mountable berm secondary containment area here. It's interesting that this happened though, because our grading actually glitched on us. So in Civil 3D, you might get some grading errors that don't cause a feature line to be created for your outside portion. If you'll notice on this area, we have these night trace perpendicular lines, and then we also have this yellow line that bounds the surface. On this one, we don't have it, and that's a glitch. So in order to fix that, you have to select one of those perpendicular to the contour lines, hit delete grading, run an audit, then hit enter. And you want to fix errors in your drawing, so hit yes. You'll see it found 14 errors, that it fixed them. And then you want to do that again, to surface by slope. Then run this again. Apply to entire length. Cut slopes, fill slopes are good. Didn't fix it. For our purposes, it's not a big deal. I can manually fix it, but it's going to take a little while. And it's not important for what we're trying to do. So I'm going to save this drawing, and I'm going to call this done. So I will follow up with an email. But what I'm going to want from you guys is, since I'm not going to be at class on Thursday either, I'm going to make Thursday an assignment day. So you guys watch this video on Tuesday, and Thursday submit an assignment to me that is going to be essentially doing exactly what we covered in this video. I want you to create a mountable berm containment area with certain dimensions, and I'll give you the specs on the side slopes. But this is very much an engineering problem here, guys. This is a very real problem that you would encounter in a real engineering design. If you think about it, I think my CAD might be frozen. But if you think about it, on the left screen that's a hole, right? And that hole has a certain volume. So typically what you'd have to do is you'd have to determine the volume of the fluids that you're trying to contain and design a berm that's high enough to contain those fluids were there a rupture in the tanks. So if you have like a big frac pad that has 6 silos of natural gas on them, those silos are going to be much, much higher than your mountable berms. So they have really large, enormous volumes. You need to make sure that the mountable berm is high enough to contain all the liquids and all the volumes of gaseous material that would occur if that mountable berm was breached, or if that tank was breached and the mountable berm was the only thing keeping our fishes alive, you know. But yeah, that's it, guys. Thanks for listening. I know this is kind of a long video, but hopefully it's a good refresher. And I will send out an email with the assignments. Thanks, guys.